serving as president currently of the Interdenominational Ministerial Coalition. Our efforts have been in the coalition to rally the clergy together on any particular issues that arise in our community, that we can understand issues well and have facts. And so we want to welcome you to this meeting. Thank you for your participation, taking time out to be here. We do not want to belabor our time. So on behalf of our board chair, the IMC board chair, who is Reverend Dr. Jeff Ellis, and our other board members, we want to welcome each of you to this meeting today. I want to express appreciation to Pastor Eric French Sr. And the Antioch Missionary Baptist Church for allowing us to have this meeting here today. I want to thank him for the conscientiousness and how he's somewhat modeling for us some of the things that we want to do in our churches. And so I thank God for him. I want to ask him to extend any words of welcome, any housekeeping matters, and then open our meeting with prayer.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Really appreciate everyone being here. I want to thank Dr. Smith for asking us to host this meeting. Just one little housekeeping issue. If you need to go to the restroom, it's right out the door. Right as you step into the fellowship hall, it is to the left. And again, thank you so much for being here with us. Let's pray together. Gracious Father, we thank you so much, dear God. We give you praise in advance for what you are going to do for all of us, because we know ultimately it is you who watches over us and keeps us. So Father, we just pray that you be with us as we disseminate information, dear God, that we replace fear with faith and facts. So please lead, God, and direct us, and we'll be mindful to give you all the praise, the honor, and the glory. For it is in the blessed name of Jesus Christ that we do pray. Amen. Amen.
Early this week, I spoke with Dr. Jeff Ellis on returning from my uncle's funeral in Huntsville. And he alerted me, he said, "Doc, we want to maybe get the pastors together." So I was becoming aware more of what was going on. And so we wanted to schedule a time where all the pastors could meet and in our own familiar context. I know that there are meetings where we go to city and meet with the mayor and things of that nature. I think there is one today at noon, perhaps. And we encourage you to take time to attend any of these. But we wanted to do this as the ministerial coalition because there are some things that are peculiar to and particular to our work. And so we wanted to distill information into the context where we are most familiar. And so in giving thoughts to the items I sent out to you in our memo, we wanted to make sure today that we address the actual virus itself, that we have any up-to-date information concerning persons who might be infected with the virus, discussion on how congregations should best prepare for assemblies in such a way as to prevent the spread of the virus, consideration given to how to advocate for the marginalized in our community. In other words, there are persons who are already dealing with life and the toughness of it and lack resources, and now something like this comes on. How do we help, and how can we help serve their needs and make resources available to them, like medical care, supplies, food, emotional and spiritual support, and the list goes on. Then we also wanted to think about how should pastors and ministers protect themselves from exposing themselves and their families to the coronavirus as a result of any visitation or any other ministry needs that do come up. And then we wanted to keep information accessible in the future days and weeks. And then we sent that out that evening. The very next day, the Governor Beshear announced his request that all churches cancel Sunday services. And And so I want to say today, I fully recognize and acknowledge the seriousness of this issue. And as president of the IMC, I want to urge every one of us to take note of the ongoing manner that this issue is taking. It is evolving, and there you'll hear the word pandemic mentioned a little later on, and that's very important. It's not an epidemic, but a pandemic, and we want to talk about these things. So the purpose, this meeting was not a reaction to what the governor said, okay? And we're going on with the agenda the Lord showed me before the governor said what he said. But I am sensitive to the fact that we want to keep awareness on what is being said from our government leaders. And so I'm not here to debate today whether or not the governor can tell churches to cancel. That's not what we're here for. It's not the purpose of today's meeting. And I uphold that each pastor and each church must make their own decision on whether or not it's best to hold services. There are certain assembly situations that churches encounter where some assembly may be necessary, i.e. a funeral may come up, things of that nature. So it's my aim that we listen to information today, we exercise critical thinking skills to the best of our ability, so that when we make a decision, we are making it from the best level of information possible, and that we are not doing so flippantly, or we're not making decisions haphazardly, or that we're not listless to the facts and the details that are coming. Somebody says, drink. Well, if you drink, drink responsibly. Well, I'm saying if you're going to hold services responsibly. And that's really what we're talking about. And not just worship services, but if there are other outreach things that we need to do to help people in the midst of this crisis. Be aware that national, state, and local decisions may very well intensify over the coming days. We're already, since we planned this meeting, we're hearing of school closings, major events. And again, I want to lift the word pandemic up. We'll talk about that so that you'll understand it's not something to be fearful of, but actually it's to help us conserve resources and spend more resources in the area to get through this. So there are always big things, sometimes in a bigger picture, and that's what we're meeting about today. So we just want to facilitate the dialogue that we can, and I want to express appreciation to Reverend Vincent James, who comes to us from the mayor's office. He serves as the Louisville Metro Chief of Community Building. We reached out to him initially about this. He is also the former president of the Interdenominational Steward Coalition, and so he understands this work very well. And so we're grateful. We want to ask him to come at this time with words from the mayor's office.
Thank you, Dr. Smith, and welcome. I'm excited to be able to come and share with you some real important information. I thank God for the leadership that we have with IMC and to be able to call us together for such a time as this. But it's the timing of everything in terms of the meeting already being planned, and then to come forward to be able to share what's happening and what's going on in our city, what's happening in our country, literally what's going to be happening in our world. I'm glad to see Councilwoman Dorsey here. She's going to be sharing a lot more information, a lot more details as it relates to COVID-19, coronavirus, what that actually is. But I just want to share with you just a couple of highlights and things that government is doing. And also, a lot of times people ask me, what do you do as the Chief of Community Building? What does that mean? What is that? Well, I actually have 6 governmental agencies that report to me. So 2 prominent agencies that are reporting to me now are several, but Public Health and Wellness reports to me. Dr. Morty, who you see on television a lot, who's the chief health strategist of the city, as well as Parks and Recreation, Office of Safety, Health and Neighborhoods, the Louisville Zoo. Also have Resilience and Community Services, and I'll be talking a little bit about some of the work that's going to be going on with that, with the community services in conjunction and partnership with our leadership from Metro Council, as well as some other opportunities that we have in a lot of our other agencies, such as Ocean also reports to me, and Youth Transition Services, which is a new agency that reports to me that is the decommissioning of youth detention services ended last year, December 31st, we uplifted a new agency, which is Youth Transition Services. One of the things a couple of things I wanted just to highlight to you, currently we know and aware that there are 2 cases here in Louisville that have been confirmed in terms of what we have. We also recognize that there's going to be more, potentially more, as even more testing becomes available. One of the things that we have and what we've been operating on that we're not unfamiliar with, in particular with our public health department, is in a crisis management mode where we have all types of things that are set up throughout the week where you're going to have daily communications from the mayor's office and from public health. There will be daily communications going forward. There's a 4 o'clock conference call that's held every day that Dr. Moria has with the media to inform them of what's happening. This is really a fluid situation. Things change day by day, and it's becoming more critical. And the most important thing that we can do is to be informed of the work that's going forth and what we need to do as faith leaders, as pastors, so that we can protect our communities and that we can protect our congregants. We have a responsibility and challenge to be able to do so. And so you're going to be hearing more information. The more information you have, the more informed you have, the better decisions that you can make. And that's why I'm excited and glad that this is happening here today. Another thing I wanted to share with you, just so you understand and know the caliber and the quality of leadership that is happening in your government. Public health, like 2 years ago, was recognized when we had another crisis, a Hep A crisis, that had broken out in this city, and we were recognized across the country. We were recognized by the CDC as having a gold standard in terms of operations. That's because how we attacked it with a crisis management role and being able to address these specific issues and not running from them, but leaning into them to be able to make a difference. And we've seen the numbers dramatically drop, unlike many other cities that can continue to see the numbers increasing. We started seeing our numbers decreasing much earlier because of a lot of the preventive measures that are coming in place. And that's what's important about this coronavirus. It's really in terms of how do you get ahead of it? How do you put things in place to be able to get ahead of it? And so I'm not going to talk too much about that because Councilman Doris is going to be sharing more. But I just wanted to let you know that we are actively working. One of the things also through RCS, Metro Council is going to be submitting an ordinance on Monday that is going to request in this ordinance that monies that were set aside because of the surplus last year, $2.7 million, that was set aside for this continuing pension crisis that we face. Metro Council and the leadership of Metro Council is putting forth the ordinance to be able to take those funds and put those funds and use them toward existing programs that we have, such as feeding those who are most vulnerable in our population, our senior citizens, as well as looking at housing vouchers and what we can begin to do in terms of looking at rent. And there's some other things in what we're working on and developing plans with that. But that's one of the things that are happening. And many other things are happening as it relates to now, as it relates to our community centers. They are open now. Just was on a conference call yesterday because things have broken out so bad in many other places that even community centers are closing down and daycares are closing. And this is happening while I'm speaking. So these things are happening so rapid. Things are changing. We have never been here before. Let me say that again. In our lifetime, we have never been here before. And so it's going to require us to be able to think totally different than the way we thought about doing church, the way we thought about serving in community, even in terms of relationships. It's hard not to hug somebody. You know, that's what we do. We hug, we dap it up. It's hard not to shake hands. But this is a new paradigm while we're in this crisis that we have to begin to rethink in terms of how we're doing things and become more conscious once we get the information that we will be able to share. So again, I want to thank Dr. Frank Smith, interim president of the IMC, and I'm always excited to be able to serve because that's what I was called to do, to serve God's people. Thank you so much.
Let's give him a hand. Thank you. Appreciate that. As we have been planning for this meeting, I've been blessed with the interaction with one of our civic leaders, our elected officials, who is particularly gifted and academically prepared to handle this with a degree in public health with an emphasis in infectious diseases. Our Councilwoman Keisha Dorsey is well equipped and well prepared to help us in the coalition as we navigate through these waters. We want to give the bulk of our time to her today to share some insights, and within her time we're going to allow for, whenever she's ready, for some questions and answers. When you ask a question, we are asking to please go to the microphone. I need you to do that. We have a microphone here, and then we have one back there. And the reason is we are recording, and this session we will later be uploading to YouTube so that pastors who could not be here today will be able to review the session. So we don't want folks saying, well, I don't need a mic, y'all can hear me. Whenever someone offers us a mic, go on and use it, amen. Because there are other reasons why we need you to use the microphone. So please, when we go to the question and answer time, feel free to use either of those mics, and we'll be happy to hear your questions. And I'll turn it over now. Let's welcome Councilwoman Keisha Dorsey.
Thank you. I'm going to set a timer for myself so I don't go over too much. Two people, I see a lot of my mentors in this room, which is a little unnerving to think I grew up with you all. But I do want to give a special shout out to one of my council comrades here. Although she's not elected, she's definitely one of my mentors, and that's Ms. Wanda Mitchell-Smith. So thank you for being here. Really quick, so I'm first going to tell you who I am. I think you guys know Councilwoman Dorsey, and then the second thing is to ask about the validity of why I'm up here and maybe not someone else. So I do have a master's in public health. That has been my formal training. I've been in healthcare my entire life, with the exception of stepping down and doing council full time. There's also a really unique preparedness that comes with that outside of the technical training. Johns Hopkins has a specific certification called Lay Health Navigation. And what that allows us to do with that certification is really take highly technical information and really translate that into layman's terms. So that is a training that I went through actually 7 years ago. I feel like I'm getting old. Under Norton Healthcare, when they were looking to do emergency preparedness responding and translating how do we take highly technical information and get that out to the public in very small digestible pieces. That is exactly what I tried to do for you today in this presentation. The precursor to that is I did try to put on every single page of this. Please refer to the CDC's documents and guidance along the lines of public meetings, and the site and the link are listed on every single slide. And then I do ask that you don't distribute this as a source document, because the CDC does have several source documents. This is really meant as a guidepost. And when I say guidepost, this is a framework, and then allow the CDC to actually provide the fence for you, if that makes any type of sense. So let's get into this. COVID-19, I'll try to break it down really simple. The purpose of this presentation, really quickly, and first of all, you all should have packets. Does anyone not have one? Okay, Reverend French, keep your hand up, and Reverend French will make sure that you get one. Okay, purpose of this is to condense the information coming from the CDC. Our recommendations have been adapted from the CDC's resources, specifically from the community and faith-based leaders' guidance. So it's on their site. Again, at the bottom of the slide, you see the reference to the direct link for that. This document is not intended, again, for distribution. So let's get into it. What does that mean for us? If you go through the slide at a high level, you'll see there are 3 different colors. I tried to do that purposely. There's this orange, red, blue, and yellow. The orange, red, anything that has a banner that's orange, red, is specifically just going to provide for us, I'm going to move this down so it doesn't distract me, background and current status. When we get into the blue, that's when we're starting to get into more of the proactive recommendations. And then Reverend French, one guy has his hand up right up here. Proactive recommendations. And then lastly, I just have one slide as to what to expect. If you grab your handy dandy pen, since we all have paper today, there is a note section on the back that you can take notes as I'm talking about this. So let's roll. So that I give you time for questions. The first question, or the first thing we're going to start is, what is COVID-19? I had a Lysol bottle with me because I was actually in the nail shop a few weeks ago, and my nail tech said, well, coronavirus is already on the Lysol bottle, so is this new? There are other coronaviruses out there. This is a type of coronavirus. So what is it? Corona, this virus was detected in China, and it's been associated now with more than 100 locations, including now the U.S. The virus was originally named, coming out of a scientific name, SARS-CoV-2, and the disease has since then been named or abbreviated COVID-19, which is the coronavirus 2019, because that's when we saw the start of this. And it goes into some further detail talking about the family of coronaviruses. How many of us have heard of MERS? Some people have, more specifically SARS. That was more popular. So this is a form of that. So this is a new type of virus, a new adaptation within the same family of viruses. Okay, so how sick is sick? Well, the complete picture of COVID-2019 is unknown. This is a new virus. So originally when this started happening, people were like, well, what's the big deal about it? Because people are saying, well, you're not going to get that sick if you're under 50 and you don't have comorbidities. Meaning diabetes, high blood pressure, other things that basically make you sick. So what's the big deal? The big deal is this is brand new. And the nature of something being new and not having scientific data on it, and we knew that it had a mortality associated with it, and it specifically targeted in a very adverse way a specific population, started to send off alarms. The other piece of this that was very, I guess, interesting for scientists was how fast this was spreading and the mode of transmission. So you get a new virus, all of a sudden a lot of people are sick, and then scientists are trying to figure out how is it being spread? Is it airborne? Is it particulate? So all of a sudden you have alarms going off because people are trying to learn a lot of information in a very short period of time. Hence the alarms going off, but then people at the same time saying, hey, it's not so bad. So you really have this sort of push and pull of information because scientists are looking at the scientific data, but we're also seeing outcomes, and they seem to be slightly conflicting initially. But then we began to see this upheaval of more and more infections, and so we began to really try to understand why is this a big deal. But then with mass spread, which is going to get into the next slide, we understand that all these people are getting sick and it's attacking a specific population, then turns into a situation where we really need to understand the disease a little more. So that's how we get from a public health crisis where a few people are sick, it's causing an alarm, it's a new disease, to, wait a minute, a few more people are sick, maybe a country is impacted, an epidemic, to a word that you are hearing now called a pandemic. All right, so pandemic. So a brief outline of that timeline. On January 30th, the International Health Regulations or Emergency Committee of the World Health Organization declared a public health emergency. That's what we were seeing in China. On the 31st, we move forward to now calling this, excuse me, an epidemic. On March 11th, at that point, the World Health Organization then labeled this a pandemic. And I put a quote down here because I think it's very timely to hear the World Health Organization quote this: "We have never seen a pandemic sparked by a coronavirus. We have never before seen a pandemic that can be controlled at the same time." And I think that's the impetus of this meeting, is the fact that this is one of the major diseases that we can actually control. All right, so briefly, what is a pandemic? And I'm not going to go into that because I think we just described it, but there's a little bit more information about exactly what a pandemic is. The one thing I do want to say is 2018 was the centennial for the last pandemic that this world had seen. Does anybody know what that was?
The Spanish influenza.
Spanish influenza. And so in 2018, when they celebrated that, there was an arm, I think, of the Securities Council that testified before the World Health Organization, kind of what we're always talking about. Are we ready for the next pandemic? And the next day, and you can look this up and fact check it, the next day that council was shut down. I think it was under the Trump administration they were shut down. And so many questions are really being even asked at a leadership level. What can we do to sustain our focus on public health and make sure that this doesn't happen again? But like everything else that happens in the world and in the nation, we have this ebb and flow of priorities. So you will hear a lot of people challenge, how did we even get here? Well, people say, well, we should have kept money in public health and on disease surveillance. But with this ebb and flow of priorities, we always get into a strain of where do we put our monies and what's most important. So that's part of how we got here. The primary rationale, and I want to address something around, I would say, the mass closures, is this ability to contain. And I want to take some time on this slide. So public health includes a lot of things. One of them is monitoring. The other thing is when it comes to observing and limiting movement restrictions in regard to isolation, quarantine, and this allows us many times to delay the introduction and the spread of the virus. So when you see all these closings or recommendations from the governor saying, hey, we may possibly need to close schools, or we're recommending to faith-based organizations or community entities or large-scale events to close, it really goes back to this primary rationale of containment, because we can control this disease and its spread through containment. You said, why is that important? Well, two things we're finding out. So one is our testing capabilities here in the United States. There's a podcast, if you guys want to download it, it's called The Daily. 2 days ago, they gave a really, really good interview in regard to why we, as the U.S., are experiencing such a delay when it comes to being able to test. When this happened in China, the disease was sequenced. And immediately you see all these other labs internationally, they use that sequence to create a test. Well, politically, there's still a strain between the World Health Organization many times and the CDC. Because a lot of times in America, we use the CDC as our gold standard. Internationally, through the United Nations, the World Health Organization is seen as the gold standard. So when people are challenging, well, why is it that other countries have more tests available than the United States of America? It's because the CDC developed its own standard for the test, and other countries use the World Health Organization standard for testing. So they were able to create more tests and get them into the market sooner. Additionally, using our national processes, even once tests are developed, they still have to be approved by the FDA. I'm going to go off on a tangent quickly. If you hear the daily interview on this specific aspect of testing, what happened was that there was a lab in Washington, the state of Washington, where we're seeing a lot of outbreaks. A lab independently created this test. Let me go back to the CDC creating tests. The CDC created tests. They send out a number of tests to the health departments, it goes through FDA regulations. And what was happening were these public health labs at the state level were communicating back to the CDC saying, hey, we're getting false positives. And so the CDC said, well, hey, just send us your testing samples and we'll test them internally. Well, that creates a delay. Does that make sense? So there was a lab in Washington where they're seeing kind of the first outbreak of this that said, well, we've created a test similarly, but they weren't or are not able to get it through FDA testing. They went ahead and tested some samples, and the interview goes into much greater detail, but essentially they were able to identify the positive reading and identify the young man who originally had the COVID virus and subsequently reached him as he was going into the school, and that's how the school was closed in Washington State. Well, since then, that lab has been asked to shut down. And part of that is really along this lines of standardization. So I think what we're seeing, and I tell you that a lot of times what we're seeing is this push and pull and control of information. And I think we're going to see a lot more of that because the question is testing capabilities versus going through our internal processes through the FDA. Do private labs have this testing capability available? They certainly do, and that's not a secret. The question is, how do we standardize that and get mass testing into the public? I think that's a question that is still trying to be answered at the national level. So many people, I think if you pay attention to the last health and education meeting, my comrade, Councilwoman Barbara Sexton-Smith, was challenging the notion of why is it that we do not have tests available in the U.S. I would argue it's not that we don't have testing available, but I would argue it's this notion of trying to standardize the testing that's available so that we don't have false positive indicators. In that same line of understanding the rationale is also understanding what we have the ability to control when a population suddenly gets sick all at once. So a lot of people say, well, it would be a good thing if we got sick all at once because we're going to naturally create this herd type of immunity. Has anybody heard of that? So it's essentially, once you get sick, kind of like the chicken pox. When you get sick, if enough people who have had the chicken pox, if somebody hasn't been vaccinated against it, enough people have that person most likely won't get sick. Well, what happens in this case is if you get an overload of people getting sick at one time, do we have the national resources to help all those people at once? Or is our threshold able to help, or the way our systems are set up, we can help a lot of people over a longer period of time versus a bunch of people at one period of time? And I think these aren't questions I have to answer. If you're listening to the news and you look at, I think it was Mass General, that showed this huge storehouse of stuff that they have in an indescript location. They said it would only last for 2 weeks. So when you see this delay in regard to containment and wanting to restrict movement and social isolation, it isn't always because this disease is so deadly, and I think that's what you hear people argue. It's not going to kill those that are young, but the question is when they are sick and they have to access resources and we don't have mass availability of it for a long period of time, in our conventional wisdom, is it better for us to isolate so that we can control the amount of people who are sick and spread that out if they do get the disease? That also allows us to ramp up our testing. So we create this dual nature of prevention, one along the lines of testing, one along the lines of being able to treat people that are sick. Does that make sense? All right, let's keep going. So secondary scenarios in regard to shifting from this containment, to mitigation conserves public health resources and directs them to where they have the most benefit. That's the other thing you're going to see is this kind of hierarchy of priority. So what they're saying is if you have people that are really, really sick, like our seniors or comorbids, and we have people that are not as sick, they're going to have mild symptoms and can kind of bounce back, and then you have a whole gamut of people who potentially can be exposed. We're humans. Dr. Moyer is just one person. I would say the health department is a fairly small team. And so part of this containment strategy is not to overburden the system in and of itself. And part of what we're even seeing with that, and I don't know if you guys were listening in the news, but a lot of the doctors got sick in China that were trying to help people. They were spending nonstop hours in these hospitals, which then weighed on their immunity, trying to help people. So part of what we can do in this synergistic effort of not necessarily closing churches, but being very wise about our interaction and being very prudent is to not only understand the resource constraints that you may have in closing the church, but also understanding what the impact of not closing it may have on other people's resource constraints. Because if there is a sickness or if there is an outbreak, what does that mean for our larger community that is still very singular and small as entity that have to bear the burden of our decisions? All right, I'm going to move to the next one. This is a really informational slide, a really cool informational slide. In your packet, I tried to do something that is probably unlike a millennial, but print out paper. Okay. So I actually was it Monday of this week, went to my senior homes and started visiting some of my community centers, and not all of them have printers, and not all of them have, thank you, Reverend French, not all of them have printers, and not all of them have colored printers. So I thought it would be very wise to go ahead and supply some of you all with the basic flyers that you can begin posting. And what I also wanted to do is to do that in such a way that it not only gave you information that's being supplied locally. So I would say our Department of Health and Wellness, our Mayor's Department, has done a really great job at this graphic and really kind of explaining what COVID is, how it's spread, what are the symptoms, how it's prevented, and when to seek medical evaluation. I would say this flyer is the most valuable flyer that you can post around. Why? Because even if people aren't able to read, they can still understand the graphic, and we have to understand our populations. They did a really good job on that. For those that want more information, there's kind of this scaled out, more literary flyer for people to review. I say that our local health department did a fabulous job, and this is no critique of the state, but as you can tell, I did include the state's notices in this. A lot of written word, very little graphics, but still highly informative, So I did include the state references in here as well. But if you can tell, our local government did a very good job at translating that into something that people could digest. The CDC, again, is the gold standard nationally for us, but we still lean, and right now we are leaning on the World Health Organization because what we are doing is kind of fly, when they build the plane as you fly it, or fly the plane as you build it. So this is a new disease. We're learning from China and these other countries that are kind of out ahead of us in this regard. And so the CDC has really come up with some really unique graphics as well, and they should be included in your packet. But if you ask me, I provided you with all of them. I told you the one that I liked the best. And it's specifically because this is our population. We're Jefferson County, and the graphic is really good. It's informative, and it's a one-stop shop. So if there's anything that you want to duplicate, I would say use that first flyer. That's why I put it on top. But if any of your congregants ask you, well, what does the state say? What is the CDC saying? That information is available to you. I also put the links for those sites on your reference guide. The reason being is because as we fly this plane, when we're building it, this information may change. And so that's why I say these are guideposts. The source of the information is included on the links in this reference page for you to go down and pull it up on your phone or on your computer or, forbid, your PC, your iPad, for some of you all to go pull this information to stay up to date yourself. These flyers may evolve. I know the first day, I think, when the city produced the flyer was one flyer. I think we're up to 3 or 4 now. And so as the information evolves, the guidance may change that's included on the flyers. If you have any questions or need resources, Wanda, I don't think I'm stepping out of bounds to say call your council member. I think they would be more than glad to get you copies if you have resource constraints in this. I would say reach out to Reverend Frank or Mr. Vincent or Reverend Vincent in this regard to, well, are you Reverend? Can I call you Reverend? Even though you're Chief Vincent. Reverend Chief Doctor. But to reach out to him if you have resource constraints, because at this point, this is not about resource constraints. We are all fighting to keep people healthy. So if you don't have what you need, please reach out to us. We'll make sure that you get it. And hold us to that. It's not often the government says that to you. This is one time that we are making that available. So I'm going to get down into the blue. You notice it changes. And it says guidance for churches. It says this interim guidance is intended for organizers and staff responsible for planning mass gatherings and large community events. It defines what a mass gathering is: a large number of people in attendance that could strain the planning and response resources of the community by hosting an event. And it gives an example of concerts, festivals, worship services, and sporting events. Some of our worship services, some of these churches around here are just as large as some of our community or sporting events. So I thought it was very prudent that the CDC thought to put all of that together. As COVID-19 outbreaks evolve, the CDC strongly encourages event organizers and staff to prepare for the possibility of an outbreak in their community. And that's what we're seeing now. Creating an emergency plan for mass gatherings and large community events can help protect you and your event participants and the local community. And that's why we're having this meeting today. The CDC has developed recommendations regarding large and mass event gatherings, and they break it down. And if you look on their site, it's broken down through what you can do before, during, and after. And that's what we're about to jump into. All right, so before. Promote the practice of everyday preventative actions. When you all came in, I love how Reverend French had kind of distributed your sign-in sheets so that it wasn't one sheet, there were different pens. I saw Lysol, I saw wipes. So those are the type of practices that we want to continue to promote. We want to promote hand washing. And I'm going to deviate from my academic nature here for a second. How many people went to Sam's or Walmart or Kroger lately? You can't find a thing. So part of this is really going to be even asking ourselves and promoting these everyday practices. Have we considered what our inventory stockpile is internally, not just in your home, but in our churches? How much soap do you have? So even if you were to open this week, how long could you sustain that based on your current stockpile? People say, well, we have hand sanitizer. Well, how long is that available? Because right now there's not any left on the market to replenish what you do have. Basic things like toilet paper and tissue are flying off the shelves. So even if you open, what is that lifetime or longevity of you being able to sustain that? And that's just to promote your basic preventative actions. Please take that under consideration. Provide and promote prevention supplies in every service. There's a specific mask that's referenced on the CDC site and around. It's called the N95 mask. I laugh when I call it the working man's mask because most of us have seen it. It's the white bubble respirator mask that kind of has the metal around the nose. I know because I've cut the church lawn a couple of times as a deacon's daughter. And so it's that type of mask. It's not your traditional surgical mask. You say, why is that important? What is your responsibility if you have a congregant that starts having a coughing fit or gets sick in the middle of service and you do not have the proper preventative supplies on hand? You have the risk of exposing your entire congregation So even understanding on the possibility of opening or hosting an event, do you have that N90, specifically the N95 mask on hand, not just for the person that's getting sick, but then for the people who may escort or treat on the back end? I will tell you, those also are not available on the market. If you check Amazon right now, like I did, you're beginning to see different things pop up. But if you notice, they're coming from other countries. And so the question is, have we validated those internally, US-wide? Anybody can put anything on the market. We can't stop them. But is it a true N95 respirator mask? And if you don't have those on hand, what is your responsibility to carry forward with a service or a mass gathering if you don't have the proper preventative tools and protective in case someone gets sick? Planning for staff absences. A question that we ask ourselves is what is our fewest number of workers that we can maintain a standard level of service? And that's what we ask ourselves from a business perspective. And we call that in the business world, back in my Humana days, SLAs, service level agreements. Well, in church language, that's how many security personnel do you need on staff? How many deacons? How many ushers to run your service efficiently, effectively, and safely? And then ask yourself, out of those staff members, how many are below the threshold of being a high-risk population? And then let's go a step further. If you are below 60, do you have a comorbidity? Are you diabetic? Do you have high blood pressure? And so for a lot of us culturally that have Black churches, a lot of us see comorbids already, and then we add age on top of that, and in many ways we can put a strain on those resources that we may have to stand up a service effectively and efficiently and safely. So planning for staff absences. And we're going to move on. Promoting a message that discourages people from attending who are sick. This is really unique for the church because typically in church setting, and I go to Magazine Street, I'm Adventist. So when our members get sick, they actually not necessarily always come to the church, but call on the church. And so this is going to be an interesting dynamic as to how does the church respond to people that are sick in the middle of a pandemic. We traditionally would go to those members either in the hospital or have some type of anointing service among them and the family, but we're beginning to see barriers that we've never seen. And so really thinking about creative options, and that's going to be mentioned later on, as ways to continue to minister to those congregants, but maybe not necessarily in person. Thinking outside of the box. Another thing that we want to do is identify ways to isolate congregants and or staff who may become sick. So not even just in normal service, but if you have a staff member, a full-time church secretary, or an administrator, or a full-time minister of music, or IT personnel, how do you handle anyone who may become sick and isolate them? This goes back to resource constraints. If you have a person that is sick and you have a normal service, and a person gets sick, what is the protocol? Not only just your everyday high-touch, high surfaces, but what is that protocol to really disinfect and to cleanse and sanitize if you have a known case? Because that responsibility falls back to who in order to get back to a sanitary level. So it's not just your everyday high touch points, but it's going to be what's the plan if you are told that you had a positive person within your congregate. What is that plan and what are your resources that are available to sanitize, contain, and disinfect? Planning ways to limit person-to-person contact. Even when church is open, the way we do things will probably change. And so at Magazine, we do this thing called Pass the Love, where everybody hugs each other, kisses on each other. But we probably won't do that for a long time. And so the way that we connect with people will change. One of the things that we also even consider is roping off a section of the sanctuary Yesterday I was talking to the pastor, and maybe having the older folks sit on one side and the younger people sit on another side, or maybe having the seniors experience service in the basement and the younger people experience service upstairs. So really understanding how we can still prevent the spread even when we do open these doors, so that we aren't intermingling populations that are higher risk versus populations that would experience this disease in a very mild manner. Identifying and isolating staff that become ill, limiting person-to-person contact, and actions to take when you postpone an activity or event. So I don't know if you all have methodologies or mechanisms currently in place to reach your members outside of the traditional just coming to church every week. But things like One Call Now, which is a auto dialer service that can communicate to your members via telephone or text message, or many of us leverage social media or YouTube or email, but really kind of coming up with a way where even if we open the doors today, per se, and then 2 weeks later we're being told to shut it down again. So really coming up with mechanisms that we can effectively communicate with our congregants. And I will tell you that's a challenge, because as a councilwoman, one of my hardest things are finding ways not only to consistently communicate, but communicate effectively. Phone numbers are always changing, people are always moving, and so how do we communicate effectively? I could put something up on Facebook or social media, and I can tell you half of my constituents are going to say they never saw it. So finding the way that we can communicate effectively, that's going to be a challenge across the board for everyone. And I think that also goes back to part of the reason why we may see this movement to move in solidarity for everyone to close. Because if everyone is kind of closed, then the question of, well, they said that they're open or they're not open, but wait, they are open, or this person is having service. It kind of creates a sense of confusion sometimes when everyone is not in solidarity, when you have these communication limits. And so communication is going to be king in this time that we're in. And right now, the governor has a rule over that. And I would say our mayor is doing a good job in that. But when the governor announced that, immediately confusion went out. Because people said, well, is my church closing? You know, we don't know. We saw, I think it was Southeast Christian said that they weren't going to close, and then they announced later on that they're going to do service virtually. So really understanding how we communicate, and let me point that out, Southeast had a unique advantage because they were able to pull the media into their announcement. Not all of us will have that advantage. Does that make sense? So really being able to understand how we're going to communicate is going to be essential. Again, this is separating those that are sick, and it's specific protocol and recommendations in that, and that's a slide 3. Okay, so we're going to go through 3. Postponing or canceling church, I think we've talked about that. Going through the chain of command in regard to how we communicate that's been said. So I think I'm providing this information. Communicating frequently, staying informed, distributing your message about COVID-19. Again, putting those flyers up in your church. Disinfecting highly touched surfaces. I do want to get on that one really quick. A lot of people are asking, well, you'll hear the term people saying, I use CDC approved cleaners. What is that? Well, a CDC approved cleaner, I have lists up here in case you want them, but they are really just highly scientific lists. If you want to have them, I have 25, you can grab them. Bleach. If you can't find another Lysol can or Clorox wipe, bleach will do the job. You just have to make sure that you're disinfecting with bleach. A little catch-22 for this little 5-foot girl who can't carry a lot, I use bleach tablets. Some of these bleach tablets, you put 1 tablet in a gallon of water, you got a gallon of bleach. And I can carry a capsule of bleach around with me all times. And right now I do. I have 5 in a plastic bag just in case I need to disinfect. But bleach tablets are where it's at, and I will tell you they are the one thing that I have not seen sold out on Amazon. So if you want to grab them, there's still one there, but they have bleach tablets. So that's part of cleansing. And I think that's it. We're getting to the end. Oh, emergency preparations. If you do have a positive test, how do you handle that? Or if someone has an issue during service and then later on you're notified that you do have to kind of go through a deep cleaning in your church. The CDC also on their site has specific recommendations for how you will control that, and even if you want to provide those recommendations to your family. Last slide is what's next. How do we handle this? I know Reverend Frank is currently working on a modality so that he can constantly filter out information to you all. But I would say evaluate the situation daily. Pay attention to the news conferences. We have one again today at noon. The governor does one frequently, so sometimes it's more than once a day. CNN is doing a great job with looping in the World Health Organization, in addition to the CDC, so we're kind of getting the global perspective on that. And then some things that I would love you to go back and do is to evaluate your internal inventory. So if you say, well, Keisha, just in general, what's my next steps? I would start reaching out to whoever your parishioners are and saying, okay, how much paper towel do we have in hand? Do we have bleach? How much hand soap do we have? If the recommendations is 2 pumps and we have 3 bottles and we normally have 200 members, well, how many pumps can we get, or excuse me, how many servings can we get, servings loosely, can we get from 1 bottle of soap? And that kind of gives you your lifetime span on your current inventory. I'll tell you right now, if you're trying to order it, things are completely out of stock because globally people are pulling all these resources. So we're going to have a supply chain issue for a while. And then looking at secondary discussions like financial capabilities, if we do close, long-term communication, and then engagement strategies with your parishioners and congregants. And then I'm going to open the floor for questions if that's okay.
That mission. I want to move quickly. Is there a representative here from JCPS?
Yes.
Okay, come right up. We wanted to just get a comment from you. We recognize news has come forth about schools, so we wanted to spend some time hearing from a representative from JCPS for just a few minutes.
First of all, thank you very much for including us in this. And Councilwoman Dorsey, that presentation was incredibly informational. Thank you so much. As you all certainly know, last night Dr. Polio announced that JCPS would follow the recommendation of the governor and our local health officials and close all JCPS schools for 3 weeks beginning Monday. Right now we're scheduled to go back to school on Monday, April the 6th. That includes cancellation of all school activities and athletic events that are associated with our schools. And we know what an incredible impact that this is having on our families. So this is a great opportunity for us to reach out to our church partners and our community partners. And if there are any opportunities for you all to be involved, we would love to take you up on that. As you know, many of our children rely on our schools as their source of breakfast and lunch. At this point, we are opening 43 emergency food sites. 35 of them are at schools, and there are locations listed on our website with a map. They're throughout the county. We also have 8 mobile sites where we will take the food bus and take them to different locations. But at this point, there is no plan for a breakfast. So if that is something that your congregations are able to assist with, you know your families, you know your communities. If you all are able to make breakfast plans or assist with breakfast to some of your congregants and the children, we know that that would be something that would impact our families. Also, tutoring, if you all have an opportunity, any of your members have an opportunity to help tutor the students while they're out of school. We have made 2 weeks worth of lesson plans available, but at this point, it is not mandatory for the students to do it. So we want to make sure that to the extent possible that learning continues to happen during these 2 weeks. And finally, probably one of the biggest things we're hearing is childcare. Obviously, we're not asking you to open your churches because inviting kids in is kind of defeats the purpose. But if there are any opportunities to assist with, and I don't even know what that looks like in your congregations and in your communities, but we just know that that is one of the biggest things that we're hearing from families who don't quite know what they're going to do for the next 3 weeks. So thank you very much. Thank you for inviting us. And I'm going to turn it over to Crystal Hawkins. I'm sorry, who's our family engagement specialist?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for coming together and just taking care of our kids and our communities. I'm Crystal Hawkins. I'm our district's family engagement specialist, and my job is to empower parents and empower staff members to partner with our families, because we cannot do it without you all. We can't do this without our parents. So one thing I do know and I'm proud of is our parents are experts on their kids, and they are their kids' first teachers. So we have over 120 parent leaders at various schools. We have family engagement specialists that really, family engagement persons at schools that work with families. But the thing that I think about, even from a parent perspective, is when I get some of those packets home, even with my child, do I have all the supplies that I need to maybe help my child? So that's one thing that if you have the opportunity to help, if you have school supplies, if you have, one parent even mentioned board games. If you have board games, things that families can do together, anything that you have, we are so appreciative of it. And one of the first things we know is it's all about relationships. It's all about knowing our families, knowing what they need. And so we are just very grateful that you're even asking, like, what can we do? But we know that's the heart of the church. That's what the church does. So we are just, here extending, if there's any opportunity to help or contribute, please let us know. We have a communications number that I think Jennifer's going to share. And then we also have parent leaders that are ready to spread the word. So if you have resources, they will share on social media. They're going to share with their relationships with other families. So if you want to contribute in those ways, we are very grateful for you.
Thank you. I forgot to mention that. If there is any questions, if you have any questions or any suggestions, you can feel free to call the communications office, and that's 485-3551. Thank you again.
Thank
The
you.
number again?
485-3551. Amen. All right. One more word, and I'm trying to end very succinctly because we want to be available for some comments. We know the media, they have to get to the mayor's office by noon, so please understand why we are moving with rapidity. If we could have from Brother Ben Johnson, if you could come and say a word about the Census 2020.
Thank you, everybody. Glad you all are here. My name is Ben Johnson. I'm following Councilwoman's lead. Though it has been identified as being with Metro Parks, I actually worked for the Census Bureau for the decennial in 2000 and in 2010. I ran the entire state, so I am well equipped to share this information. And I'm going to start a little differently. The coronavirus conversation is an example of why we need everyone to fill out their census form. How those two things relate. That census information is what the government uses for healthcare facilities. It's what JCPS uses for school allocations, for resources, for programs, for times just like these. Nobody knew in 2010 that we were going to be here in 2019 and in 2020. So if you can't have a better example than what we're dealing with right now as to why that census is so important. It is absolutely confidential. This year it's easier to do than ever. Again, back to the coronavirus. You can do it online, you can do it over the phone, you can do it by mail. But one thing I can guarantee you, if you do not turn it in, the Census Bureau will send somebody knocking to your door. Guess what they don't want to do, and guess what we don't want to have right now? It's more people going door to door, knocking on your doors or whatever. So in the midst of all of this, whenever services get back on, or however you are communicating with their congregants, please stress the absolute importance of filling out the census form and the fact that it's mandated by the Constitution and federally all that information is confidential. Back to the JCPS piece, if you have children, grandchildren that are 4 or 5 years old, and you do not include them on the census form, and that is one of the populations that is missed more frequently, as well as African American males. If you do not have a young person 4 or 5, when the next census rolls around, they're in high school. We've missed elementary school, we've missed middle school, and then want to understand why the teachers are whatever, the classrooms are whatever, the facilities are whatever. So I will share some information with Dr. Smith. Glad you have another way of getting information out. There are flyers, pamphlets, online things, YouTube, talking about every aspect of the process. So whatever you all can do, whatever information you need, we'll be glad to provide. Thank you for the time.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson, thank you. All right, we're getting ready to, thank you. I want to get ready to close. I want to thank everyone for being here, and appreciate our presenters who have come, and especially Pastor French and Anyon for hosting again.